I hire a sex worker for a few hours a night to hug and hold me, and I give her flashcards which tell her what to say to me. I was married to my wife for 17 years, and never once had she turned to me and told me she loved me. For 10 of the 17 years the marriage had been sexless. This wasn't on the part of my wife. She always had a high libido, whereas mine has always been low. I guess we just wanted different things when it came to sex. She wanted wild and dangerous sex, while all I wanted was passionate lovemaking between two people who loved each other. To be fair, we were two very different people when we met. They say opposites attract, and at the time I felt lucky to have found her. She worked as a psychologist and taught at a very prestigious university. I owned a small building company, and we met when I was contracted to do work in the building where she taught. The marriage wasn't always bad. At the start, she was amazing and tried hard to make it work, but it didn't take long for the differences between us to become a barrier. The last 3 years have been the hardest. The constant arguing meant we no longer shared a bed together. Whenever we do manage to be in the room together, the air is thick with a tension that is pressed down on every breath, filling the room with an unspoken weight. It had reached a point where the love I craved was no longer just a longing, but a gnawing hunger. When I first hired a sex worker, it started as a way to just feel the warmth of a woman. I wanted to feel like I was wanted and loved, even if it was a hollow performance. The first 2 times I hired a sex worker, it was just sex. It was nice and passionate at times, but it wasn't the sex I was missing. When I hired the sex worker the 3rd time, I made it clear I didn't want sex, I just wanted someone to hold and to hold me. It felt great, but it was still missing the emotional aspect, and that's when I came up with the idea for the flashcards. I hired the same sex worker every time. Gemma was considerably younger than me. She was the same age my wife was when we first met. Apart from age, the only other thing that resembled my wife was the color of her eyes. By our 4th encounter, Gemma knew what I was after, so when I pulled out the flashcards, she was happy to go along with it. You make me feel safe. Hold me tightly and don't let go. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. I love you so much. Gemma was perfect. I didn't need to prompt her, and she knew exactly when to read the cards back to me. Her touch was warm and gentle, as if she could sense the weight of my loneliness, wrapping me in an embrace that felt both safe and electric. With each encounter, I felt more alive, as if she were breathing color back into my gray existence. My encounters with Gemma went from once a month to a couple nights a week. My need for love and validation became like a drug. I was hooked. The withdrawal was unbearable and left me feeling empty, like I had a dark void in my soul. There was a change in me that didn't go unnoticed by my wife. I started dressing differently. There was what you could call a pep in my step, especially around my wife. I won't lie, it started having a strange effect on my relationship with her. She was easier to be around, but I did suspect she knew something was up. The motel where Gemma and I met was a little more upmarket than the usual sleaziness and despair of a roadside motel. It wasn't 5 stars, but it did offer a certain discreetness. When the door opened, I was taken aback. Gemma stood before me, but it felt as if my wife had stepped into the room. She wore the same soft blue dress that my wife loved, its fabric hugging her figure just right. And her hair was styled in the same way, long and cascading with those effortless waves. Even her eyes seemed to shine with that familiar sparkle, making my heart race with a mix of longing and confusion. As she stepped inside, I noticed how she embodied my wife's mannerisms perfectly, the way she tilted her head when listening, the gentle laugh that danced from her lips, and the soft way she held her hands. It felt surreal, a haunting echo of my wife. My heart raced, torn between pleasure and a disquieting sense of unease. Was I still with Gemma, or had I somehow crossed a line into a disturbing fantasy? Gemma's uncanny resemblance to my wife sent a chill down my spine. The same blue dress, the exact haircut, and her mannerisms mirrored my wife's so perfectly that it felt like a cruel joke. "How did you know to dress like this?" I asked. She smiled, tilting her head just like my wife. "I thought you'd like it. Don't you remember how much she loved this dress?" My heart raced as a knot twisted in my stomach. Was this a coincidence, or had she been watching us? I wasn't sure what to think, and I couldn't, in good faith, continue this charade. I have to go, I said as I quickly left. That evening, a fragile tension hung in the air as my wife and I sat across from each other at the dining table. She glanced up, her blue eyes searching mine, and for the first time in ages, I felt a flicker of something I thought I had lost. "I've missed you," she said softly. "Really?" I replied. It was the first time in 10 years I heard even a hint of empathy from her mouth. She nodded as the tension in her shoulders slightly eased before she reached across the table and gently brushed my fingers. As we moved to the bedroom, an unfamiliar warmth washed over us as our barriers slowly crumbled. "Let's forget everything for a moment," she said. That night, she gave me everything I had longed for in our relationship. For the first time, I felt the affection I craved as we made passionate love. As we lay there in the sweaty aftermath of our lovemaking, I reveled in the closeness. But that was quickly shattered when my wife started echoing the same phrases from the flashcard I had Gemma recite. I lay there, stunned, my heart pounding as her words echoed in the darkness. "You make me feel safe," she whispered. How could she know those exact words? My mind raced as I pulled away slightly, the intimacy suddenly replaced by a chilling unease. I shrugged off the previous night as a strange coincidence, convincing myself that I was overthinking things. My wife had simply said the right things at the right time, nothing more. The next evening, I decided to sleep in the spare bedroom, seeking solitude. Sometime during the night, I was jolted from my sleep as I felt a familiar warmth. Opening my eyes, I froze. Gemma was lying beside me. Her arms were wrapped around me in a tight embrace. A chilling feeling of dread crept up my spine as I looked around the room. All the flashcards I had made for our encounters were now nailed to the walls of the room. "You make me feel safe," she whispered, repeating each phrase like a ritual, her voice eerily soft. I couldn't handle it anymore. The flashcards, the strange way my wife had been acting, the eerie resemblance Gemma had started to take on everything felt like it was closing in on me. I needed space. I needed to breathe. So, I went to the motel. The same place where I had met Gemma before, back when things were simpler, back when I thought I had some control over my life. I'd barely settled in when I heard a knock on the door. My heart stopped. I wasn't expecting anyone. Reluctantly, I opened it, and there she was, Gemma, but something was off. She looked exactly like my wife again, but this time there was no warmth. Her eyes were cold, just like the way my wife used to look at me when we argued. "You couldn't stay away, could you?" she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Gemma, why are you doing this?" She stepped inside, not waiting for an invitation. "Gemma? Is that what you call me now? You pathetic little man." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. That's exactly how my wife used to talk to me in our worst moments. "You think paying for affection makes you a man? You think a few nice words on flashcards are enough to fix your sad, broken life," she said in a cold, unrelenting tone. "Stop it," I said, shaking. She ignored me, walking further into the room. "You've always been weak. That's why she can't love you. You disgust her." "Shut up," I shouted. "You're worthless. You were never enough for her. You'll never be enough for anyone." I snapped. The words, the look in her eyes, the way she embodied everything my wife had said and done to break me over the years, it was too much. I lunged at her, shoving her hard. I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted her to stop. But she stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the coffee table. Her body crashed through the glass as I stood there, frozen in horror as she lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling around her. What have I done, I thought to myself. I rushed over to her, but she wasn't moving. The blood was everywhere, glistening under the motel lights. I didn't know what to do. My mind was spinning out of control. In a haze, I dragged her into the bathroom, laying her body in the tub. My hands were shaking as I wiped the sweat from my forehead. For a moment, I thought about walking away and leaving her for the cleaning staff to find. I couldn't think straight, couldn't focus. I needed help, so I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. There's been an accident. Someone's hurt. The police arrived quickly, faster than I expected. I led them to the bathroom, trying to calm my racing heart. I was shaking as I opened the door to show them the body, my mind already running through every possible scenario. But when I pulled back the shower curtain, there was no blood. Instead, lying in the tub was a mannequin lying there with its glassy eyes staring up at me, its limbs twisted and stiff. My stomach dropped. Pinned to its chest and limbs were all the flashcards I had given Gemma. "You make me feel safe, I love you, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me." The officers stared at me, confused, but I couldn't say anything. I couldn't explain it. The room spun as I sank to the floor, gasping for breath. Had I imagined everything? Or had it all been part of some twisted game? As I slumped against the wall, catching my breath, my vision blurred with panic and exhaustion. I noticed one of the flashcards pinned to the mannequin wasn't like the others. The handwriting was different, sharper, and more deliberate. My stomach knotted as I read the words. "Smile. I'm watching you. Your loving wife." Ice ran through my veins. My gaze darted around the room. I hadn't noticed before, but tucked discreetly in the upper corners of the bathroom were tiny, blinking red lights. Cameras. I rushed back into the main room, scanning it frantically. Sure enough, there were more, one behind the mirror, another disguised as part of the smoke alarm. I felt sick. She had been watching me here, in this very motel room. She had seen everything. Every intimate moment, every breakdown, every twisted encounter with Gemma. How long has this been going on? My chest pounded with fury and disbelief. I had to confront my wife. This thing that she'd orchestrated wasn't just about our marriage. It was something far, far darker. I drove to her work, my hands gripping the steering wheel. When I arrived at the university, I stormed into the building where she taught, not caring about the stares or whispers as I pushed my way toward the lecture hall. My heart pounded louder with each step. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't focus on anything except getting to her. I flung open the doors to her lecture room. The room was full of students, all women. And there, front and center, sitting with perfect posture, was Gemma. But she wasn't just any student. She was sitting at the front like a prize pupil, fully engrossed in what was happening on the projector screen. It took me a moment to register what I was seeing. On the screen were videos of us. Every humiliating, intimate moment of our marriage, playing out on the screen. My heart sank as I saw flashes of our arguments, the loveless years, and then the nights I'd spent with Gemma. My wife stood at the front of the room, dressed impeccably as always, her cold eyes gleaming with satisfaction. She paused the video and turned to face me with a smile that sent chills down my spine. The entire class turned to stare at me as well. "Welcome, darling," she said. "I didn't expect you so soon, but it's a perfect time for a demonstration." "What is this?" I growled. She gestured to the screen casually, like she was explaining a case study. "This, my dear, is the culmination of years of work. A deep dive into the male psyche, specifically the fragile male ego and toxic masculinity." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only malice. "And you, my love, have been the perfect subject." The room was filled with murmurs of agreement from the students. Some took notes. Gemma's eyes locked onto mine, but they were no longer soft or inviting. They were cold, complicit in this twisted charade. "You set this all up?" "The cameras, the flashcards, Gemma." My wife tilted her head, her smile widening. "Of course. Every part of your life, your marriage, your infidelity, I curated it all. I needed to break you down, just to strip away every false layer of self-worth until only the truth remained. That's what this experiment was about. What better way to understand a man's breaking point than to use his own desires against him?" I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. "This is sick," I cried. I felt like I was going to collapse. Every intimate detail of my life had been exposed, dissected, and turned into a study. Every word, every flashcard, every moment of my desperation, it had all been for her amusement, for her research. The students were all watching, some amused, some intrigued, and others looking at me like I was nothing more than a pathetic creature beneath their feet. I couldn't breathe. My world as I knew it had shattered. My wife wasn't my partner. She had been my tormentor, my puppeteer, and I had danced right into her hands. Everything I thought I controlled had been orchestrated by her in the most cruel, calculated way. "You're a monster," I whispered, my voice trembling. My wife's smile widened. "Oh no, darling. I'm a scientist." Next story. I started the night shift at a Japanese hospital. It had a strange list of rules. I never imagined my first job as a nurse would be like this. Fresh out of nursing school, I thought working night shifts would give me the experience I needed. Something to prove myself. It wasn't what I wanted exactly, but the hospital was desperate for staff, and I was desperate for a start. The hospital wasn't in the heart of Tokyo, where I had dreamed of working, but farther out, on the city's fringes, nestled near the mountains, where the urban sprawl met the wilderness. The isolation didn't bother me. In fact, I thought it would be a good way to learn without the pressure of being in a big, crowded facility. Quiet. Uncomplicated. The mental hospital was old, towering over the surrounding area like some relic of another time. The kind of building that looked like it belonged in a ghost story, long hallways, walls yellowed with age, and the perpetual smell of antiseptic and damp concrete. Its exterior walls were cracked in places, the paint peeling off, and inside, the sterile fluorescent lights flickered just enough to make you wonder if the electricity was reliable. My first night at the hospital had started normally enough, though. At 10 p.m., as the day's staff was packing up, I found myself alone in the nurse's station, organizing my materials for the night. There wasn't much to do yet, except get used to the quiet and the way the hospital seemed to shift when the sun went down. Yuki, one of the nurses who had only been working here for a couple of weeks, strolled in, clearly relieved to be heading home. She had the look of someone who was still figuring things out herself. 2 weeks isn't enough time to settle into a place like this, I thought. "You're the new one, right?" she asked, giving me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I nodded. "Yeah. First night." She stopped mid-step, raising an eyebrow. "Did they give you the rules?" "Rules?" I asked, confused. Yuki's expression shifted slightly. "They didn't give you a set of rules for the night shift." I shook my head. No one mentioned anything about rules." "That's weird," Yuki said, frowning, as though something wasn't sitting right with her. "When I started, they gave me these weird rules. I've only been here 2 weeks, so I'm still getting used to them myself." She walked over to the desk and pulled out a blank piece of paper, grabbing a pen. "Let me write them down for you. You'll want to follow these." I watched as she wrote quickly, her brow furrowed slightly. She seemed distracted, maybe even a little uneasy. Her inexperience showed, but she handed me the paper with a serious look. "Follow these exactly, and you should be fine." I took the paper from her and looked at the list of handwritten rules. Rule 1. At 12:45 a.m., make sure the windows in the west wing are closed. If one is open, close it and leave immediately. Rule 2. If you see a patient walking in the hallway after midnight, do not speak to them. They are not patients anymore. Rule 3. If the lights in the east wing go out, leave the wing and do not return until sunrise. Rule 4. If the elevator doors open by themselves, do not get inside. Wait for them to close. Rule 5. If you see a shadow that doesn't belong to you, leave the room immediately. Rule 6. If escape is your only option, be prepared to sacrifice a part of yourself. I stared at the paper, not sure what to make of it. It looked like something out of a ghost story. I glanced up at Yuki, expecting her to laugh, but she didn't. "Is this some kind of initiation thing?" I asked, hoping that maybe this was just some odd tradition for new staff. "No," Yuki said, shaking her head, her voice quieter now. "It sounds ridiculous, I know, but trust me, you'll want to follow them. I've heard." Things. I frowned, studying her face for any sign of humor, but there was none. She wasn't joking. This was something real for her. Are you sure this is all of them? I asked. Yuki hesitated, biting her lip as though trying to remember something else. I think that's everything. I'm still getting used to it myself, she forced a smile. It should be fine if you follow these. Before I could ask anything else, Yuki grabbed her things and left the station, leaving me standing there in silence. I looked at the clock, 10:20 p.m. The night was just beginning. I folded the paper carefully, slipping it into the pocket of my scrubs. A joke, I thought. It has to be. But something about the way Yuki had looked at me, the serious expression on her face, it was unsettling. The hospital was unnervingly quiet at night. The hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional distant creak of old pipes were the only sounds that broke the silence. I found myself wandering the halls just to keep myself busy, the sense of isolation heavy in the empty corridors. By 12:30 a.m., I made my way toward the West Wing, the folded piece of paper still in my pocket. There wasn't any particular reason I went there. Maybe I was testing the ridiculous rules to see if they were just part of some strange tradition for newcomers. Or maybe it was the pull of curiosity. What if Yuki was right? The West Wing was empty, as I expected. Its long, dimly lit hallways seemed to stretch on forever, the shadows from the rooms creeping out toward the center of the hall. I glanced into each room as I passed, but they were all empty. Just empty white beds and old medical equipment, unused and forgotten. I checked my watch. 12:42 a.m. My fingers grazed the folded paper in my pocket, and I sighed. Might as well get it over with. I began checking the windows in the hallway. First one was closed. The second one closed. Third one as well. I kept moving, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the still air. The cold from outside seemed to seep in through the walls, making the air heavy and uncomfortable. As I approached the final window, my breath caught in my throat. It was open. Just slightly, but enough for the cold night air to drift in, brushing against my skin with a chill that felt too deliberate, too personal. I stood there for a moment, frozen by the absurdity of it all. But I shook it off, telling myself that old buildings had quirks like this. Windows didn't always close properly. Still, I felt a strange reluctance to touch it, to shut it. It was as though something wanted it open, needed it open. I closed the window, and the latch clicked with a sound that felt final, like closing a door to something unseen. The silence that followed was louder than the click itself. Relieved, I quickly left the West Wing, trying to shake off the feeling that something had changed. It's just an old hospital, nothing more. By 1:30 a.m., the hospital had settled into an eerie kind of stillness. I returned to the nurse's station, trying to distract myself by checking the security monitors. Most of the patients were asleep, their rooms quiet, except for room 5. The man inside had been pacing back and forth for a while. I didn't think much of it at first. Nighttime restlessness wasn't unusual here, especially among the patients. But as I watched the monitor, my eye caught something else, something moving in one of the hallways. A man in a hospital gown was standing in the middle of the second floor corridor. His back was turned to the camera, his body still, facing away from me. At first, it seemed like he was just standing there, lost or confused. His head was slightly tilted to one side, almost like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. A cold sensation crawled up my spine. I grabbed my flashlight out of reflex, but my hands shook as I moved toward the hallway where I'd seen him. My footsteps were slow, hesitant, the beam of light bouncing nervously off the walls as I reached the corridor. When I turned the corner, he was still there, standing in the center of the hallway. His back was to me, his hospital gown hanging loosely off his frail frame. His posture was wrong, his body stiff like a mannequin. He wasn't moving. I couldn't even see the rise and fall of his chest to indicate he was breathing. I took a cautious step forward, then stopped as I heard it. His breathing, it wasn't normal. It was ragged, deep, and inhuman. Each breath came in uneven bursts, almost like gasping, but slower. the kind of breath you'd expect from someone trying to force air into lungs that didn't work anymore. A wet, dragging sound followed each inhale, like something inside him was broken. He still didn't move. His head stayed tilted, his back rigid. He was waiting. I wanted to call out, to ask if he needed help. My instinct was to move closer, but then the rule flashed in my mind. If you see a patient walking in the hallway after midnight, do not speak to them. They are not patients anymore. I felt a rush of dread, as though a cold hand had wrapped itself around my heart. His breathing grew louder, more ragged. I could hear the wet, gurgling sound of his lungs struggling to function. But he didn't turn around. He didn't move. I took a step back, then another. My chest tightened with fear, my breath catching in my throat as I slowly backed away from the hallway. I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. My mind screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to move slowly, carefully. As I turned the corner, there was no denying the cold, creeping terror that told me I'd narrowly avoided something terrible. By 2 a.m., the sense of unease had settled into my bones, and I couldn't shake it. Every creak of the building, every flicker of the lights, felt deliberate now. Like the hospital was trying to send me a message, something just out of reach. I wandered the hallways again, trying to keep myself occupied, but the longer I stayed, the more the air felt thick, oppressive. Around 2:15 a.m., I heard something. A faint tapping noise, rhythmic and unnatural. It was coming from room 7. I hesitated, the rules flashing in my mind. I didn't remember seeing anyone in room 7 earlier. It must be a mistake. Maybe a patient had been moved during shift change, and I hadn't noticed. The door to room 7 was slightly open, and I felt an unnatural pull toward it. The tapping continued as I approached, like fingers lightly drumming against a wooden surface. I pushed the door open. Immediately, the air shifted. It was colder in here, so cold that I could see my breath fogging in front of me. The lights in the room flickered violently, and an overwhelming sense of wrongness settled over me. The tapping had stopped. I took a step forward, my heart pounding in my ears. That's when I saw her. A figure stood in the far corner of the room, her face obscured by long, tangled black hair. She was unnaturally still, her head slightly cocked to one side. Her lips, split wide into a grotesque grin, were too red, too wide. Her eyes, those hollow, dark eyes, stared right through me. She took a step forward, her body moving with a fluid, unnatural grace. Too fast. I ran out of the room before I could process what I had just seen. My mind was racing, heart hammering against my chest as I sprinted down the hallway, desperate to get back to the nurse's station. What the hell was that? Am I losing my mind? I reached the end of the hallway, my breath ragged, but my momentum was suddenly stopped by a soft ding. The elevator doors in front of me slid open. Rule 4. If the elevator doors open by themselves, do not get inside. Wait for them to close. My legs trembled, threatening to give out beneath me. As I stood frozen in place, staring into the empty elevator, I watched it, barely daring to breathe. My eyes stayed locked on the empty space within the elevator. I could almost feel something in there, lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to step inside. For a few moments, the elevator remained open, its doors wide and inviting. Then, slowly, they slid shut with a final, mechanical click. I let out a shaky breath, my nerves frayed beyond belief. I was losing the grip on reality. Everything felt wrong, so deeply, impossibly wrong. I rushed back to the nurse's station, trying to collect myself, but the panic was tightening around me like a vise. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what was happening. As I approached the station, I glanced down the corridor leading to the east wing. That's when the lights went out. The entire hallway was plunged into darkness so complete that it seemed to swallow the air around it. My feet felt like they were made of lead. I stood frozen in place, unable to tear my eyes away from the pitch-black void that had once been a hallway. The shadows crept toward me, moving like liquid, alive with an unseen force. I felt it then, something watching me from within the darkness. Its presence was undeniable, pressing against my chest like a weight I couldn't escape. Slowly, I backed away, my breath quickening as I distanced myself from the blackened wing. I couldn't see what was in there, but I knew I didn't want to find out. Not now, not ever. I arrived at the nurse's station, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I rifled through the papers on the desk. My vision was blurred, panic clawing at the edges of my mind. The hospital was alive with something I couldn't understand. As I shuffled through the mess of paperwork, my hands found an old, crumpled sheet of paper buried beneath patient records. I unfolded it slowly, dread creeping up my spine with every word I read. The list was identical to the one Yuki had given me, except for one crucial detail. Rule 3, do not enter room 7 after 2 a.m. My heart sank. I had broken a rule. Yuki forgot a goddamned rule. I glanced up from the paper, my hand shaking, and that's when I saw it. There, on the far wall across from the nurse's station, a shadow stretched unnaturally long, too far from any light source to be my own. At first, it was subtle, a dark shape that shifted in the corner of my vision. But as I looked closer, my breath hitched. The shadow moved, but I hadn't moved. Rule 5, if you see a shadow that doesn't belong to you, leave the room immediately. My chest tightened with terror. The shadow stood on the wall, warped and twisted, like someone standing just out of sight, pulling itself toward me. It didn't make sense. There was nothing there, nothing that could cast a shadow like that. It loomed larger, darker, as if the very light was bending to accommodate it. And then, the shadow shifted again, breaking from the wall and moving across the floor toward me, as though it had come alive. The air in the station thickened, suffocating me. I couldn't breathe. My legs felt frozen in place, my feet glued to the ground, as if the shadow was pulling at me. She was watching me from within the darkness. I could feel it. I stumbled back, tearing my gaze away, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. As I fled the room, the shadows twisted unnaturally, creeping along the floor, their edges darkening and thickening. From within the darkness, she began to form, her twisted body pulling itself free from the void, like she was born from the night itself, her torn smile stretching wider with every step. My legs carried me down the hallway, every muscle screaming as I reached the hospital's entrance. I slammed my hands against the heavy doors, but they wouldn't budge. No matter how hard I pulled, no matter how desperately I tried to force them open, they remained sealed tight. My mind spiraled as the sound of footsteps echoed behind me, slow, heavy, and deliberate. I knew who they belonged to. She was coming, the slit-mouthed woman, the figure I had seen in room 7. She was here, her presence a physical weight pressing down on me, her whispers growing louder, crawling into my ears, seeping into my mind. The words were unclear at first, but then they started forming into one clear message. You broke the rules. You can't leave. Frantic, my eyes darted around the small reception area near the entrance. There, on a metal cart pushed against the wall, I spotted it. A surgical tray, tools scattered across its surface. Among them was a scalpel, sharp and gleaming in the dim light. My breath hitched as I remembered the final rule. If escape is your only option, be prepared to sacrifice a part of yourself. My hands closed around the scalpel, and I held it up, the blade catching the dim light of the room. I had no other choice. The footsteps were growing louder, closing in. The thought of what she might do to me was enough to push me over the edge. With trembling hands, I brought the scalpel down toward my finger. My heart raced, my breath catching in my throat. Tears blurred my vision, and I bit down on my lip, bracing myself for what had to be done. The blade pressed against my skin, and with a deep, shuddering breath, I made the cut. The pain was immediate, searing, and blinding. Blood pooled around the scalpel, dripping onto the cold floor. I wanted to scream, but I bit down harder on my lip, tasting blood as I forced the cry back down. I had to finish. With one last agonizing movement, my finger dropped to the floor with a sickening thud. The room spun, my body trembling from the shock of it, but I gasped, almost collapsing onto the floor beside it. But then, the doors to the entrance burst open, and I felt the weight lift from the air. The hospital seemed to sigh, releasing me. Blood still poured from my hand, warm and sticky, as I stumbled on shaky legs toward the main street. Every step felt like a battle, my heart thundering in my chest, my breath shallow and ragged. The outside world lay just beyond, a cold, indifferent freedom waiting for me. But as I crossed the threshold, I didn't feel relief. Not at all. I turned back, my gaze lingering on the dark, cursed corridors of the hospital. I had escaped, yes, but I had left more than flesh behind. Something deeper, something vital, had been torn from me in that place. Next story. I'm a werewolf, and I'm afraid of my human girlfriend. I think I wanted it at first. Being a werewolf was such a chaotic, wild experience, constantly hanging on the edge of control, staring into the chasm of instinct and impulse, seeing how long I could teeter on the border of sanity. Melissa represented caution, discipline, and control. It had been like a sigh of relief, a release from responsibility, to be on a metaphorical leash. She grounded me, policed me, made sure I kept my nose clean. It started out self-imposed. I chose to stay in for the nights, chose to stay human. I couldn't let her find out about my condition, and on top of that, she was the perfect excuse to get me out of the weekly, if not nightly, hunts my pack always dragged me along for. After a while, though I'm not exactly sure when, it stopped being self-imposed. After holding back from my carnal nature for a period of time, I began to crave it. But every time I decided to leave, my heart would start pounding. I'd start looking over my shoulder as I got ready, feeling guilty and, for some reason, apprehensive, these feelings strong enough to dissuade me from leaving. I remember the first time I saw Melissa standing in the threshold between the dining room and the kitchen, her hands on her hips, her eyes dull and calculating. My hand was on the doorknob, and she regarded me, frozen in that position, like an alpha would a pup who'd taken more than his fair share of a kill. "Where are you going?" she asked. I swallowed, my mind searching for an explanation. I couldn't tell her I was a werewolf going to run with the pack. You're not leaving for the night, are you?" she said as her head leaned to one side critically. It was a question, but it wasn't a question. I turned my head aside, my heart beating heavily in my chest. For a moment, indignation rose in me. I was a werewolf, a terrifying beast of the night. How dare that mere human instill such fear in me? My eyes happened to glance out the window, and I saw the empty trash bins still sitting down at the end of the driveway. Relief flooded through me, and before I could think about what I was saying, I spoke. "Of course not. I just happened to see the trash cans out there. Forgot to bring them in earlier, so I figured I'd run out and grab them now." At that, Melissa's thin line of a mouth curled into a smile, and she nodded my quest for the trash cans had been approved. I turned away from her and opened the door, and that's when she said it, quietly, but loud enough for me to hear. "Good boy." The hair on my arm stood up, and I paused in the doorway. My breaths became heavier as thoughts and emotions raced through me, but I shoved all the implications aside. The trash needed to be brought in. That was a few weeks ago, and now the leash felt more like a noose. Every rebellious thought I had, every time I tried to pull away, I felt this closing grip around my throat, as pulling away only tightened the knot. Eventually, however, the need to leave, to run, and to hunt was left so long unsated, it grew to match the feelings that held me back. Over the course of a few days, I built up the courage to confront Melissa, and on the night I told my pack I would join them, I approached her. I opened the door to the basement, and the rattling sound of the washing machine bounced up the stairwell to my ears. I swallowed and descended. The basement was unfinished, and Melissa stood on the concrete floor in front of the washer and dryer, two shining white pieces of machinery in an otherwise gray and brown basement. A single incandescent light bulb with a pull string hung over Melissa's head like a one-dimensional halo, casting hard shadows about the room. I reached the bottom of the stairs and waited. She was finishing up setting the dryer to run, and I didn't want to interrupt her. Finally, the dryer hummed to life, joining the running washing machine in a chorus of mechanical grumbles and clicks. Melissa heaved a basket of clean laundry up to rest on her hip, and she turned. "Oh, Terry, did you need something?" My voice caught in my throat, and I stared at her dumbly for a few moments. Her eyes narrowed at me, and shiver ran down my spine. "Something the matter, Terry?" she asked. I cleared my throat and steeled myself. "Some friends of mine are going out for the night and I'd like to," I stopped, as the noose tightened. Melissa's face hadn't changed, but somehow it had. Her gaze burned into me. I could almost feel my skin peeling and curling from the heat. My eyes fell away from hers and settled on the basket weighing heavily on her hip. I took a step forwards and reached out my arms towards the laundry. Here, let me take that. I can carry it upstairs so." My voice trailed off as Melissa made no movement to allow me to take custody of the laundry basket. She just held her piercing gaze on me. "Some friends of yours are going out for the night and you'd like to," she echoed, using my exact tone until she curled the end of it into a question. My head dipped submissively, but I pressed on. "I'd like to," I swallowed and furrowed my brow. No, my words would not be a question or a request. I raised my head to meet her gaze. "I'm going to head out with thee." "And you're telling me this at 9:30 at night?" she asked sharply. My gut twisted. Well, I didn't mean to wait so long. Time got away from me here. "Let me take that laundry basket." I didn't think we had anything planned for this evening, so I didn't think about mentioning it until. Now I rattled off as I reached again for the basket hanging on her hip. Again. She made no move to hand it to me. "Upstairs," she stated, her voice terrifyingly devoid of emotion. My entire body tensed up. I didn't move. Melissa stepped around me and started up the stairs, her footstep heavy with the weight of the laundry she lugged along. I listened to her ascend, but heard her stop at the top of the stairs. The floor creaked as she turned to regard me. "Come." My feet moved without thinking. My head stayed down. I traipsed up the stairs behind her and followed her as she walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. She set the basket down in front of her and then patted the seat beside her. I moved to it and sat. "Help me fold this laundry. Since you've been staying here, I've got double the amount I usually do. After this, I've got 2 more loads coming through," she told me. My voice came out quietly. "Last time I tried to help, you yelled ... told me. I was folding things the wrong way. And now you know the right way," she stated cheerfully. I felt a heat begin to rise in my chest. "You just want me to help so I can't go out." Silence hung in the room like a fog. Melissa said nothing, so I stood up. "Down," she ordered. My body almost listened instinctively, and that made me angry. I let out a snarl and faced her, my heart pounding in my chest. "You, do not order me around like that. I will tolerate it no longer." Melissa turned her icy cold glare to me, and it took everything I had not to falter. "I said down," she repeated. My lips peeled back in furious grimace, baring my teeth. "Who do you think you are?" Melissa's lip twitched, and then her mouth creased into a frown. "Don't push it," she warned me. I laughed, incredulous. "Don't push it? You've been pushing me around for weeks. I'm going out tonight, whether you like it or not." I stormed off towards the front door. "Terry, stay," Melissa barked. I felt compulsion grip my chest, but it only infuriated me more. Something in me snapped, and a burning sensation spread through my entire body. I was going to change. I couldn't stop it, and I was fine with that. I hunched over as my bones and muscles twisted and snapped and grew. I felt my face stretch into a pointed snout, and hair crawled through every inch of my skin. My teeth grew, my canines sharpened, my clothes ripped and parted into shreds. I let out a deep guttural growl and spun to face Melissa. I would see fear in her eyes. I would see in her the same apprehension she instilled in me. I reveled in the thought of her shrinking away, terrified of my true form, but the woman was doing no such thing. Slowly she rose and stepped away from the couch, regarding me with something like disappointment and perhaps a bit of pity. Rage overtook me, and I lunged at her with a snarl. Melissa stood her ground, and I stopped an inch from her face. There was no fear, no apprehension, no sense of mortal danger from her. I was several feet taller than her in my true form, and yet somehow she looked down on me. Her shape didn't change, but in my head she grew. She grew bigger than me, and she was stronger than me. That's what her eyes said. That's what her posture told me, and I could not bring myself to argue. "Sit," she commanded, her face twitching into a moment of a grimace as she spoke. My jaw snapped shut and I fell to my hindquarters. Melissa's hand curled into a fist, save her index finger which pointed to the ground. Lay down defeated. I let out a slight whimper as I willingly collapsed to the floor, placing my chin on the ground at her feet. "Now, stay," she bid me, a hint of irresistible softness entering her voice. I stayed there for a few moments and did nothing but breathe. Melissa slowly lowered herself into a squat and her hand rested upon my head. Her knuckles curled and she scratched through the fur between my ears. "Good boy," she cooed quietly. I felt my body relax and a euphoric sensation spread through every inch of my being. And I had never been more afraid. Next story. I hooked up with a hot girl, but she has some weird rules she wants me to follow. My friend Alex loves partying. He organized a party at his parents' place for New Year's Eve and wanted to make it the biggest one yet, since his parents were out of town. He invited a bunch of friends and told them to invite their own friends, with the only condition being that they should bring some booze. His parents have a luxurious house, which has enough room for 2 entire football teams, so Alex wasn't overly concerned about the place being crowded. When I arrived around 10:30 p.m., the music was already blaring 3 blocks away, and most of the people were pretty drunk. I joined in on the drinking, and soon enough got tipsy. It was around this time that I noticed one girl at the party who seemed to be standing next to the wall on her own, holding a cup in her hand. She immediately caught my eye because she was otherworldly beautiful. She had long, blonde hair and blue eyes. The blue dress she wore prominently showed her sultry figure, and it was all I could do not to stare. She seemed to catch my gaze and smiled as she took a sip from her cup. "Yo, Daryl, you having a good time?" Half-drunken Alex wrapped his arm around my shoulders, almost spilling his drink on me. I leaned in and shouted in his ear so that he could hear me over the loud music. "Yeah, man. Hey, listen, who's that girl over there?" What he raised his eyebrows and leaned in closer. I repeated my question, and once he glanced at the girl, he said, "I don't know her name, man. But Matt's been with her, says she's a beast in bed." "Ah," I said, catching the girl's gaze once more. I had just ended a 3-year-long relationship, so I wasn't really looking for anything serious. A one-night stand sounded like a perfect way to end the shitty year that was 2019. Alex leaned in to shout something in my ear. "Hey, but even though she fucks like a nymph, Matt said he'd never interact with her again." "Why?" I asked. Alex shrugged. "No idea. He just said that inviting her home was the worst idea." "Hey, Jamie." His attention went to another friend that passed by and I was left alone with my own thoughts, as difficult as they were to be heard in such a loud place. Matt was pretty picky with women, so having another girl that isn't to his liking was no big news. I realized that the girl was still staring at me with a seductive smile, so I allowed the alcohol in my blood to give me the surge of courage I needed to approach her. We introduced each other and made some shallow small talk. She said her name was Melissa, and after a few brief exchanges, I asked her to dance. She said yes, spurring me to try and take things even further. As we danced, things started getting more heated between us, and at one point, Melissa wrapped her arms around my shoulders and leaned in, as she said, "Do you have a place? We can take this somewhere more private." She bit her lip as she said so and continued dancing gently. "I got an apartment. Not too far away, we can use my car," I said, my boner practically talking instead of me. She nodded, and before anyone noticed, we were out of Alex's house. We barely managed to enter my apartment with our clothes still on, and as soon as I locked the door behind us, she stopped kissing me and said, Wait. Before we do this, there are some things you need to know about me." "What things?" I said, kissing her neck, not caring about talking right now. She gently pushed me away, blushing and panting, and said, "Please, this is very important. Listen to what I have to say, and I promise I'll let you do anything you want with me later." She ran her hand across my inner thigh. I was so horny at that moment I just wanted to jump on her, but I nodded and agreed to let her speak. She sat upright on the couch and exhaled before she said, "All right, so there are a couple of rules you need to follow, because otherwise you may put yourself in danger." Oh great, I thought to myself. She has STD or something. She continued, "The first thing you need to know is now that we started this, we need to finish it to the end. If we don't, you'll have 8 years of bad luck. If you ask me to leave after we've had sex, something even worse may happen." I frowned in confusion, but before I could ask anything, she continued, "If you see my eyes turning red during sex, close your own eyes, but don't stop. You're going to hear me making deep, guttural noises, but they should be gone within a minute or so. Again, just don't open your eyes during that time. I can't be responsible for what happens to you if you do. If you feel that you might lose your erection, try to focus on something to hold it, at least until the weird noises stop. If you feel my grip getting painfully firm on you, like claws, stop moving, and I'll gradually let you go. After we are done having sex, I will ask you some questions, like how it was for you. Have you had any better partners? How many girls you slept with, etc. I will need you to answer this as truthfully as possible. I'll know if you lie. Once we are ready to go to bed, put a piece of any kind of raw meat out of the fridge on the counter and leave it there overnight. We'll be sleeping in the same bed, so if you touch me during the night and I feel ice cold, ignore me. I may wake up and try to coax you into speaking to me by asking you a question or becoming hysterical. Whatever I do, just ignore me. I won't hurt you, so as long as you pretend I'm not there, you'll be fine. If you wake up and find me staring through the window, get out of the apartment as quickly as you can. Don't bother getting dressed, just get out. If you wake up and I'm not there, call out to me. You're going to hear one of the following things, either me saying that I'll be right back or calling you to come out. Ignore the latter, that's not me. And last, but most important rule, make sure to set your alarm and wake up at exactly 6:06 a.m. If you see me still in bed by then, covered with the blanket over my head, get out of the apartment as quietly as you can. I will be out of your apartment by 6:05 a.m., no exceptions. That's all." She exhaled, staring at me in anticipation. I stared back, with mouth agape. I hadn't even realized how dumbfounded and breathless I was until she finished. "So, do you have any questions?" She shrugged. No. I mean, everything is clear. Give me a moment, please. I need to use the bathroom." I fumbled to form a sentence and excused myself to the toilet. While there, I texted Matt, "Hey bro, you know a girl named Melissa?" His response came almost immediately. "Yeah, why?" I said. "Well, I hooked up with her, but I heard you said there was something wrong with her. What's her problem?" Matt read my message right away, but responded only after a minute. "Did you invite her home?" The message made me feel uneasy. I started to type when his next message came through. "Bro, please tell me you didn't invite her home." "I did," I responded, my hands practically shaking by this point. Fuck, Matt replied. "What is it?" I asked, now starting to feel full-blown panic. He said, "You have to go through with her rules now. Don't kick her out before she decides to leave on her own. She will be out of there by 6:05 a.m. "Bro, what are you talking about? I'll just tell her I'm not feeling well and send her home." "Don't do that. Listen, do me. Don't fucking do it," he immediately responded. "Why?" I asked. He typed for a moment before saying, "Because my friend Kit did it, and they found him dead in his bed 2 days ago." Just then, 3 slow knocks resounded on my bathroom door. Next story. I saw a goddamn werewolf That shit was terrifying. Or I think I did. So I guess you all know about werewolves. I mean, seriously, if you never ever have heard about one, you must be living under a rock. A really big one. I need to confess you guys what I saw because this is crazy. I don't even know if what I saw was real or my imagination, but was it creepy? So me and my wife both agreed to go on a holiday to Romania. We are both from England and I wanted to know how the country that beat us 4-2 in the U21 European football looked like. She did some Googling and found out Cluj-Napoca would be nice since we didn't want to go to the capital because she thought it was so cliche. I didn't really care that much. So we left on 24th May and we were both really happy. We got on the plane and we left to Romania. Yay. On our way there, nothing special happened except I'm frightened by planes because I'm scared of heights. I know, sometimes I can be a pussy, but I'm just not that plane guy. So it took us 4 hours to get there, and we arrived at the Avramiancu airport. All nice and good. I helped my wife take the luggage, and we went searching for a motel or something. We took an Uber, and we went to the west of the city, as there were cheaper motels from what I heard from the locals. City was great, nice people, nice buildings, and nice everything. My wife was so excited I almost thought she was gonna explode in it. We didn't know Romanian, but we hoped they would know English. We arrived at the motel, and to be honest, it was pretty shitty, but at least I had a pillow to put my head on, and it was actually very cheap, so it worked for us. We went to this history museum, but I don't think you guys care about that. So one night, I think it was 4 a.m., I just woke up randomly. I don't know why till this day, but I know I just couldn't get myself to sleep again. I said bloody hell and just go outside, take a cig. I saw there was a guy at a vending machine and went to him, maybe chat a little. I figured he probably wouldn't know English but went for it anyways. Hey, what's up? I looked at him. He was wearing a white hoodie and a cap. I'm gonna be honest, I thought he was some drug dealer or something, but I wanted to talk to someone and my wife doesn't like it when I wake her up. Hello. I'm good. How about you? He told me as he got his fresh and cold Pepsi from the vending machine. I was surprised he knew English. Most of the people we've come across had a hard time understanding us. Guess these folks from Romania don't speak very good English. Anyways, maybe it's just because we only talk to grown-up men, not with some random teenagers. And this guy looked like 40, so it was nice seeing him. He knows how to talk. Oh, finally, I thought nobody knows how to speak properly in this city. Haha, I glanced at his Pepsi. Well, you were probably talking to some old motherfuckers, man. What are you doing up this late? He asked me. Nothing, just thought I can get some fresh air. I took some money from my pocket and got myself a Pepsi too from that vending. Where are you from? He asked me with a grin on his face. I'm from London, mate. I'm on holiday here. I didn't tell him I was with my wife or something. Guy was friendly, but didn't look like he was friendly. Oh, London, London. I know, I've been there with work. Anyways, gotta go, he told me as he rushed into an alley. Figured he was some kind of a hobo. I stood there drinking my Pepsi when I heard a loud growl from the alley. I shook. That was no dog growl. It was so loud I think everybody heard it. That hobo couldn't growl like that. I thought to myself, what was he doing? I heard a scream and I knew shit went off. At first I didn't know what to do. I was scared. What that could be. A bear, a wolf, a lion, a tiger. What the fuck? So I said fuck it and went to the alley. What I saw wasn't human, neither animal. It was some kind of a creature, big and muscular. It had his hand in the dumpster, and it was so dark, I didn't see the guy, but I figured that thing must have killed him. It ran away on all fours at supernatural speed. I sat there like an idiot trying to convince myself it wasn't real. It's a hallucination or it's a dream. I went into the alley. I know. Stupid idea, and I got my phone out. I put on the flashlight and looked into the dumpster. It smelled really, really bad. What I saw will haunt me forever and ever. It was the hobo's head with claw marks on it. Next story. That time I saw a skinwalker, a witch, and a werewolf. Late summer, 1986. We were driving through the Rocky Mountains on our way to Array. There were 3 of us, Steve, Danny, and me. We were young, dumb, and fed up with what life was really like after college. So we bought some matches, packed a cooler of beer, food, and beer, and loaded up my trusty Toyota with all the fixings for a classic camping trip. This trip was supposed to shake up the devastating monotony of our daily live, and shake us up it did to the very core. Right before we were getting ready to set out, Steve's mom ran out of the house and told him he should take their newly adopted family dog, Luna, for safety. Steve was hesitant. He didn't want to have to look after the dog, especially if we were going to be drinking. And she was a big dog, a mixed husky and something else, Great Dane maybe. But his mom insisted until, finally, he broke and agreed to take her. Luna looked up at him with her warm blue eyes and seemed to smile. Steve sighed and said, "I guess I'll sit in the back with her." No, I said, walking over and patting her head. "Let her sit up front with me," she wagged her tail. Most of the car ride went smoothly, and we sang along to the radio, mooed at cows, and waved at or flipped off motorcyclists. But as we neared our destination, and the sun sank behind us, leaving us in a thick, almost tangible darkness, we started to become jumpy, pointing at strange shadows and swift movements. Luna, though, was curled up and asleep beside me, unaware of our growing fear. The sky was covered in big, roiling clouds that blew swiftly towards the east, covering and revealing the full moon at random intervals. By now we were the only vehicle on the road. My headlights barely sliced the darkness around us as we weaved our way through the mountains. The isolation, the darkness, the silence, it was all so crushing. "Steve, I thought you said we would be there before the sun set. I told you we shouldn't have stopped at that bar." "Oh, Danny, I didn't know we'd be there for that long. You wouldn't stop your stupid pool game, and I won. Simon, it's not that dark out. Would some money make you happy? You asshole. Hey, cool it, look, what the hell is that?" I slowed the car down to a stop, trying to see what was blocking the road, but the light from the cloud-covered moon was too dim. "What the hell?" "Danny," I whispered, as she rolled down her window. I was apprehensive, worried this was someone's attempt to rob us, or worse. I had heard all the urban legends before. "I just want to see better." She stuck her head out of the window, and I rolled a little bit closer. Luna, feeling the change in the car's movement, lifted her head and sat up, panting. Oh shit. I think it's a dead deer, you guys." Gross. Danny retreated back inside the car and rolled the window back up. "Who the hell just leaves something like that on the road?" "Asshole," Steve said, then leaned forward. "Hey man, think you can drive around it?" Yeah, I think I can." I approached the thing, now seeing the antlers and the gleaming black eyes, open, staring, dead. It blinked. I yelped and jerked the steering wheel, sideswiping the mountainside. Shit, what the hell, man? It's alive. What? That fucking deer. It's alive. As I spoke, the deer lifted its head and bleated. The sound echoed around the chasm. We all jumped and watched as it pushed itself up until it was standing on its hind legs, like a man, but uncanny, grotesque. Mesmerized, we sat unable to move as the thing walked over to us, slowly, decidedly, as if walking on 2 legs was a thing this deer did often. It leaned down next to Danny's window, its face so close to the glass that steam from its nose fogged it up. A low noise rang out through the car. Luna was growling, her hackles raised, crouched in the seat next to me. Bang. The thing rammed its head into the window. Chaos erupted. Danny screamed, piercing. Hi. Luna started barking, booming, persistent. Steve yelled, telling me to fucking go. Just go. I, shaking, struggled with the clutch, stalling. Bang. The window cracked, and the thing started making an incredible sound. It sounded like a weird screeching, guttural form of laughter. Finally, the clutch caught, and I sped the hell out of there. I checked the rear view and saw the thing, standing on 2 legs, looking after us. Suddenly it leapt forward and began running after us. It ran on 2 legs instead of 4, and it was fast, so fucking fast. I drove as fast as I could on that winding mountain road, but despite my speed, the thing still caught up with us. It tapped its antlers on my window and screeched that weird laughter again. Then it pointed in front of us, bared its teeth, and stopped. The abruptness of how quickly it disappeared caught me off guard. Watch out. I snapped forward, and what I saw made me slam on my brakes. A house. A fucking house. In the middle of the road. I guess it was more of a cottage or a hut, but there it was, clear, vivid, in front of us. Danny was audibly crying in the back seat, repeating, "What the fuck," over and over to herself. Steve was breathing heavily, like he had just run a marathon. Luna was whimpering beside me and scratching at the window. Nausea enveloped me, made worse by the vibration from my pounding heart. Seriously, what the fuck is going on? I think I'm going to puke, man. Don't fucking open that door. Just back up, turn around, man. Let's go back. Towards that ... thing. No fucking way, man. Well, if you didn't fucking notice, there's a goddamn house in front of me. Just drive through it, Simon. No. No. Danny, calm down. It's okay, we're okay, we'll be okay. Danny simpered and started sobbing again. Shut the fuck up, Danny, please. Guys, look, oh God. The house, it was spinning, slowly, and stopped when the front of it pointed directly at my car. The door to the house slammed open, emitting a sound like a gunshot. A single point of light emerged from the darkness inside the house, with a candle. And holding it up was a figure, stooped over, covered in what looked like blackened rags. It began to approach us, lurching forward swift, then slow, then swift again. It was making this eerie, deep staccato sound. Are you for real right now? Steve was leaning forward, peering out the windshield. Let's go. Reverse. That thing is behind us. Run it over. Look, Danny screamed. The stooped figure was now running at full speed straight at us. It slammed onto my hood, and we could finally see that it was an old woman, covered in wrinkles, completely bald, with sharpened yellow teeth. She was moaning and moaning. She crawled up the hood, opened her mouth, and licked the glass, leaving a trail of blood-colored saliva. Luna went wild, barking, foaming at the mouth, throwing herself at the door. Please, back up now. I slammed my foot on the gas, but my tires made a sickening sound, and the smell of burnt rubber slipped into the car. It's behind us. It's fucking behind us. I turned back to see the deer's head, teeth still bared, peering at me from the back window. Shit, fuck, what do we do? What do I do? Luna, no. With a final lunge, Luna forced the door open. It sounds shocking, but she was such a large dog, and strong. A powerful wind picked up, and the roiling clouds dissipating, allowing the light from the full moon to illuminate the scene in front, and behind us. Luna was as still as a statue, slightly crouched, poised to leap. The hackles on her back quivered, and a single thread of drool spun itself down from her mouth. She began to shake, faster and faster. It looked like she was having a seizure. The old woman and the deer thing were both looking over at her. Something strange was happening to Luna. It looked as if her limbs were breaking, elongating. Her snout narrowed, sinking closer to her face. She rose up onto her hind legs, humanoid, and howled up towards the sky before locking eyes with the hag on my car. In the blink of an eye, Luna was on the woman, ripping her away, shaking her to and fro in her jaw, like a rag doll. Luna flung the woman towards the house, and she struck it with some force and didn't get back up. The house and the woman vanished in a puff of smoke. Luna turned towards the thing behind us. It screeched, raising itself up to its full height, challenging her. Luna howled again, then licked her fangs. The thing took 2 steps towards her before turning tail and fleeing down the road. Luna giving chase. They both ran on 2 legs instead of 4. We sat in total silence for a few moments, until I leaned over and slammed the passenger side door closed. I think Danny passed out. I turned to look at Steve. He looked at me. Let's get out of here, man. We got 2 miles before the thunk, thunk, thunk beneath us couldn't be ignored any longer, a flat tire. I pulled over and we eyed the darkness around us, paranoid. I'm not changing it. I'm not going out there, Steve said, loudly. Don't worry, ... there's no spare. What? I took it out to make room for all the camping stuff. Are you fucking kidding me? Nope. Well, what the hell do we do now? I sighed. I didn't know. Suddenly, like magic, like a miracle, headlights appeared behind us. A godsend, a car. I hope they're normal. Me too. Should we tell them? We locked eyes again. No. If they bring it up, maybe. If it's a cop, definitely not. He'll think we're high. The car rolled up beside us. It was totally black with tinted windows. The window rolled down and behind it sat a middle-aged man. He looked tired, maybe sad. Need some help. Oh. Thank God, Steve whispered. Yes. Flat tire, don't have a spare. Well, that's dumb, the man said. You should always carry a spare, always. Never know what could happen. Lucky for you, I think I have one that will fit your car. You joking? The man shook his head and hopped out of his car. He was dressed sharply, black suit, black tie, black shoes, all covered by a trench coat. Simon, you can hold the flashlight for me, I hesitated, then exited the car. What happened here? He pointed to the window next to Danny's head. It's been like that for a while. Dumb neighbor kid hit it with a baseball. The man nodded, and her. Tired, just tired. We've been driving for a while. Driving where? Array, for camping. Nice place. We've heard. Say, the man said, releasing the jack, job done. Seen anything weird tonight? My heart sped up, and I looked around us half expecting the deer, or the woman, or Luna to come sprinting towards us. What do you mean weird? Oh, I dunno. Anything out of the ordinary. No, why? Oh, no reason. Just heard some spooky tales. Tales that the natives who used to live around here would tell. What tales? The man stood up and dusted his hands off on his coat. Well, he said, ignoring my question, you're all set. You're about 20 minutes out from Array, and 2 hours from the sunrise. I'd advise you get a move on. Never know what might be stalking you out there. I'm headed the same way, actually. I can drive behind you if you like. A muffled yes came from inside the car, and we both looked up to see Steve nodding voraciously. Yeah, that would be great, actually. The corners of the man's mouth twitched a bit as he nodded, sliding back into his car. We drove to Array without incident, and as soon as we hit the city, the man in the car behind us flashed his brights twice, then flipped a U-turn, speeding back down the way we came. I thought he said he was going this way, I said, looking in my rear view. Who cares? Let's get a hotel room and leave first thing tomorrow morning, Danny said. She had woken up as we were driving towards Array. We filled her in on the strange man and how he helped us, but she was still spooked and jumpy. And we did just that. We didn't dare camp in the wilderness or even leave the relative safety of the town. On the way back to civilization, we swore to never tell anyone what happened. It was too weird, uncanny, horrifying. Steve was silent, afraid of what his mom might say or do about Luna. We made up some story about how she had fallen over a cliff after chasing a deer. Poor Luna. We did stop for an hour around the area it happened and called out to her, but to no avail. We never saw her again. It's been years since this happened, and I'm old now. The 3 of us lost touch after we returned from the trip, but vowed to keep this secret to our death. Last I heard, Steve died from a heart attack, and Danny was diagnosed with stomach cancer. I figured it's about time I shared my tale. Maybe it'll help me make some semblance of sense out of it. In the end, though, I don't know if those ... things were protecting us from her, or if she was protecting us from them. I guess I'll never know. Sometimes, late at night, when I hear howling, I like to imagine it's Luna, out there, somewhere, running free in the wild. Next story. How to survive camping rule 13. I went hunting with the man with the skull cup. If you find evidence that an animal has tried to get into your food overnight, contact camp management. Don't move anything so that we can inspect the area. It is likely a raccoon, but it's better to be cautious. You see, sometimes that creature isn't a raccoon. Sometimes it's something that by all rights shouldn't exist in this world. My dad took me hunting much younger than he did my brother. I think he wanted to make sure I understood that these creatures were dangerous. I'd seen E.T. and already had a habit of dragging home frogs and fish that I caught in our neighbor's lake, so the obvious progression seemed that I would bring home something deadly. I remember sitting through a weekend hunting class with my dad, listening to the instructor talk mostly about gun safety, and knowing that we weren't going to be hunting deer. My first hunting trip was nothing more than a stray dog. Dad let it run off, and then set traps out instead, and it eventually took the bait, and Dad took it to the shelter. I think it was sent out of state to be fostered. Our area isn't great about taking care of homeless animals. After that, the hunting trips just sort of all blended together. They aren't terribly exciting, to be honest. It's a lot of hiking around the woods with a gun, or staking out in one spot, waiting for something to come by. I suppose some folks like that sort of thing, but I don't particularly care for it. We see all kinds of things. Most of the time it really is just a wild animal rooting around for food. Groundhogs are particularly notorious. They're brazen. Some camps have had to chase them off with a broom before. But there's also raccoons, porcupines, stray dogs, and sometimes coyotes. On the inhuman side, we get an assortment of whatever creatures our campers drag with them. Some of the more exciting ones have been the werewolf. That wasn't a fun time. The snake with the woman's head. The cockatrice you think getting woken up by a rooster is bad. Try waking up to something that sounds like a pterodactyl screeching in the trees every morning in the yall. The yall was actually more sad than dangerous. We were just trying to drive it out of the campground so people wouldn't freak out about the large antelope-like creature with horns swiveling all around like the Exorcist or something. And it bolted in the wrong direction and tried to cross the highway before we could redirect it. It got hit by a semi-truck. There's also a lot of creatures that I don't actually know how to classify. I suspect some of them are from cultures that I haven't read up on, but there's others that I think might be something new trying to climb its way out of our subconscious morass of monstrosities. There was the swarm of flesh-eating butterflies. Yes, I know butterflies will eat dead things, but these were going after live creatures too that we had to bring in someone that owned a flamethrower for. That's also the reason I'm reluctant to use fire. We did catch the forest on fire that day, and it wasn't a disaster only because we had the county's entire fire department already on site and ready to go. We've also had two-headed wolves. We don't even get normal wolves around here. Deer with no heads and their bodies were just one giant mouth, and some sort of weird ooze creature that my uncle got rid of just by driving his pickup truck back and forth over it a couple dozen times. Maybe this all sounds exciting to you, but to me it's pretty normal, ordinary stuff. Like you probably wouldn't go on and on about the report you wrote at work today, right? So it feels weird to write out detailed accounts of, well, someone reported an animal getting into their cooler last night, so I went out with a shotgun and killed something that looked kind of like a badger, except it had 6 legs and a scorpion tail cause. That's literally all there is to it. Most of the time, we go out there, find it, put it down or drive it off, or rehome it when it's a stray dog. With this past week being a big event, we had a number of reports of animals trying to get into people's food. We try not to actively go hunting during big events unless there's evidence that whatever is out there is going to be aggressive. It didn't seem like it this time. Whatever was sneaking around was doing so late at night when no one was around and would quickly flee if someone woke up or walked by. The only aggressive creature were those stupid groundhogs, and campers can chase them off without our help. However, the campers are all gone now, so I decided to go scouting through the woods to figure out what was stalking the campground. Also, it got me out of helping with cleanup, which is good, because it always pisses me off to no end when I find campers leaving behind trash. How hard is it to clean up? Seriously. Hopefully no one accumulates enough strikes this year to get their camp dissolved. That's always a lot of fun. Telling someone they pissed you off enough times that they're getting relocated to the field and their nice shady patch in the forest is being given to someone else. I went at night, as that was when the creature was active. My aunt wasn't keen on the idea of me going alone, but I don't really have anyone to take with me right now. My uncle is dead, and the old sheriff is still adjusting to his prosthetic. As a compromise, I was going to take one of Brian's dogs, but that plan got scrapped pretty fast. The man with the skull cup showed up at my house as I was getting ready. I opened the door at the knock and stared in dismay at the man standing on my front porch. Last time he'd shown up unannounced like this was Halloween, and he'd poisoned a bunch of people and pissed off the town. So I'm sure you'll all forgive me in that my instinctual reaction to his presence at the door wasn't, "Oh, hello," or "nice to see you," it was, "Oh no," to which the man with the skull cup just stared at me with eyes narrowed in annoyance for a moment before asking if he could come in. I just stared dumbly at him before stepping back and holding the door open for him to enter. He glanced around the living room curiously, his gaze lingering on the mantel where the pictures of my parents were sitting. "Do you have a house, like the lady with extra eyes?" I asked. "Or a lair of some kind?" "No. So where do you go when it rains then?" I get wet. His expression was flat. I don't suffer from the cold or heat. Why would it matter to me if it were raining? "I wish I were immune to the heat," I muttered under my breath. "It's cooled down a little, but it's still been a miserably hot summer. Or maybe every summer is miserably hot and I just forget and think that every summer is worse than the last." "You talk to the fairy," he said, once he was done making a full circle of the room, staring intently at every decoration and piece of furniture I had in it. "I did," I replied. "Why didn't you tell me what was going on? Would you have trusted me?" I was quiet for a minute. No, I don't think I would have. I don't trust him now, and I dared to tell him that. He just laughed softly. "Smart," he said. "I have had both reason and opportunity to kill you, and I didn't. I instead chose to save you, thereby putting myself against most of the other inhabitants of this land." His humor quickly vanished. "And believe me," he continued soberly, "there are plenty of things out there that I would rather not go up against. Why won't you tell me what you want? It might not work if you know." He frowned, his brow knitting with displeasure. "Though I'm not sure I like the way it's going already." "Fine, whatever. Be cryptic then. I need to get moving. I have to pick up a couple of the dogs from Brian's house." Then he said that I shouldn't bother, that he'd go with me to hunt down this creature, and he was every bit as useful as the dogs in that regard. I thought about the remarks you all have been making in the comments about tagging the creatures on my land, and envisioned him with a dog collar on, and had to quickly turn my back to him so he couldn't see the look on my face as I struggled to not laugh. So thanks a lot for that, everyone. But it also meant that I couldn't come back with an excuse for him to not tag along fast enough, and he took my silence as assent, and anyway, that's how I wound up heading into the forest with the man with the skull cup. For the record, he is not better company than the dogs. He's a broody asshole that doesn't like to talk, and yes, I know you don't talk while hunting anyway, but there's a difference between spending time with someone that isn't talking to stay quiet and someone that isn't talking because they hate talking. While the dogs can't talk, they make up for it by being cuddly and friendly. The man with the skull cup is neither. And for all of you about to make comments, we'll just get this out of the way in advance. He also lets me do all the work. He stood watching while I inspected the affected campsites. There hadn't been any prints or other signs of what had been foraging, but I was hoping now that all the campers were gone the creature might have come back and left behind a trail. After a bit of this, I had to admit defeat and suggested we go down into the deep woods and search around for a bit before calling it a night. Unfortunately, a lot of Rule 13 occurrences end with us never finding whatever had been in the camp. We were about halfway through the loop that led through the deep woods when a tremor faintly reverberated through the ground. The man with the skull cup grabbed the back of my shirt and pulled down, I knew better than to fight, so I buckled and collapsed downwards, falling into a crouch next to the man with the skull cup. I strained to see past the brush we were concealed in, but he was quick to wrench on the back of my shirt, dragging me backwards and further towards the ground. I tumbled over and landed on my side just next to him. He clasped his hand over my mouth and held motionless. I did the same, staying as low to the ground as he was. If the man with the skull cup was hitting the dirt, then obviously I needed to be doing the same. The ground beneath us shook. For a brief moment I thought the thing in the dark was coming, based on instinct alone, but then I realized that the light wasn't vanishing, and the shaking had a rhythm to it. There were pauses, footsteps. A shuffling gait interrupted by faint delays. The ground trembled slightly with each step, alternating between one that could barely be felt and one that echoed into my ribs as I lay pressed against the forest floor. My line of sight was obscured by the brush we cowered behind, but between the leaves I saw something passing by us, something immense, wreathed in darkness, with a single glowing point for an eye. Its gaze was fixed straight ahead. Its body shifted with each step, one shoulder dipping low, coinciding with the shaking of the ground beneath us. It walked with a limp. I don't know why that is. It seemed like it would go past us. Then it paused, directly adjacent to where we lay hiding, and its head turned slowly back and forth, the red eye shining like a star. The man with the skull cup's hand tightened over my mouth, his nails digging into my cheek. I wanted to reach up and wrench his hand away. I knew better than to make a noise at this point, but I was too afraid to move. The horse-eater's head turned in the other direction now, panning back and forth, and I had the impression that it was searching for something. I felt my heartbeat thundering in my ears, and I could only hope that its hearing wasn't nearly as acute as some of these inhuman things. Then it moved, a pale hand snapping out into the darkness of the tree branches, its fingers spread wide like a net. A scream rent the air, and it sounded human for a brief moment. Then the creature withdrew its arm, and clutched in its fist was a mountain lion, struggling wildly and screaming in terror. The horse-eater ate it in 2 bites. I stared, unable to look away, as the front half of the mountain lion vanished into that darkness, its hind legs frantically kicking, its tail flailing, and then the rest of it was gone, and I saw the back of the creature shiver as it swallowed its meal. Then its head sank, and it slowly started walking away, that red eye fixed straight ahead once more. Neither of us moved until it was gone, and the earth had stopped shaking at its footsteps. Only then did the man with the skull cup take his hand off my mouth. I pushed myself to my feet, breathing in quick, rapid gasps more out of terror than any real deprivation of oxygen. "Did you hide us somehow?" I asked, when I was finally able to speak. "No, that was luck. It wasn't hunting. That was just a convenient snack." And the man with the skull cup looked shaken when he admitted that. I ran my hands through my hair to dislodge any leaves and anxiously redid my ponytail, trying to hide the trembling of my hands. "I've been leaving it food," I hissed. "Between the grocer and this, I've had to make deals with pretty much every surrounding farm in the area. I've been buying their sickly livestock and anything that dies on their land, from livestock to nuisance animals they've shot or trapped. I try not to think about how much I'm paying for this, because, oh yes, Kate owns the campground. She's an endless fount of money, right? I think something else has been taking it," the man with the skull cup replied. "Ha ha ha, awesome. Another problem for another day, I suppose. So what is that thing?" I ventured. "You brought it here. Shouldn't you know?" His tone was accusatory. I suppose I can't blame him. It does seem willing to prey on other inhuman things and animals alike. I'm thankful it seems to reserve humans for deceiving into making terrible choices, as we didn't have any abrupt disappearances during the past couple weeks. There were a couple minor incidents with the less lethal creatures, but that's not unusual. Someone did follow the lights, but my staff intercepted them before they got too far. And there was rampant hammock theft, which was actually my staff aggressively removing any hammocks that they hadn't identified as being put up by a human being during setup. "If you lost a hammock this year, sorry, they're in my garage. Send me a note with what it looks like, and I'll ship it back to you." Keeping people out of the deep woods seems like a viable strategy, but it's not financially feasible to do long term. Of course, now that I think about it, I probably should have added something like, "Don't make bargains with the thing with a glowing red eye. No matter what it promises you, you will regret the cost to the rules," but the pamphlets were already printed, and that's not an insignificant expense. I told the man with the skull cup my reasons for bringing it here, despite not knowing what it was. Why couldn't he just tell me what it is? Why did he have to be so difficult about withholding information? "Why do you assume I know everything?" he snapped. "You know more than me." I think that mollified him a bit. He tilted his head slightly, considering, and admitted that was true. But he still couldn't answer my question. After that, I decided we were done. The mountain lion had been trying to get into the coolers at night, and now it was tragically dead. I do feel bad for it. They tend to stay far from the campground unless something drives them here, which is usually when other water sources start drying up. My neighbor's lake is a tempting prospect, and it was probably ranging onto my land in search of food. Nothing unnatural about its presence at all. I turned back towards the house, and the man with the skull cup, surprisingly, went with me. We walked for a bit, and then, without warning, the man with the skull cup turned and shoved me aside. I was too surprised to even cry out. I stumbled, almost fell, and caught my balance in time to look up as someone came running out of the darkness at us. It was a camper, dirty, and their hair was disheveled, but they were human. Their eyes were wide and their mouth agape, jaw unhinged, and I couldn't even see the white of their teeth beneath what seemed to be a blackened froth bubbling out of his throat. I saw this small detail as they charged mindlessly towards me, arms flapping limply at their side, and then the man with the skull cup was between us and slamming his knife all the way to the hilt into the man's neck. The man flipped, his feet skidding out from him as the force of the blow brought him to a stop, and the man with the skull cup kept going, dragging him down until his body hit the ground with a soft thump. His legs kept kicking, as if his mind hadn't caught on to the fact that he was on his back with a knife through his throat. There was no blood. None. I watched, aghast, as the man with the skull cup jerked savagely at the knife, ripping it downwards all the way to the groin and cutting the body open. The skin split like a broken grape, revealing the rib cage and a writhing mass of chitinous bodies inside. I wanted to vomit. I covered my mouth with both hands as the spiders surged upwards through the cut. It reminded me of the Brussels sprouts, their legs unfolding as they were released from their nest. The man with the skull cup wasn't done, however. He swiftly rose and held out his cup, carefully tilted it, and let a steady stream of the liquid pour out and into the empty body cavity. The spiders steamed where it touched them, and then they began to dissolve, their bodies turning to sludge and tearing apart at the force of their own struggles, collapsing into a glistening ooze with legs twitching in their death throes, like grass in the wind. The ones bubbling out of his mouth subsided, dribbling back down his throat, and I could see his teeth now, stained with ichor. "This is what was getting into people's camps," the man with the skull cup said. "It wasn't after food. It could have gotten into those coolers. It was creating a disturbance so that I would come out looking for it, as I always did whenever we got these reports. Whatever was controlling the spiders knew my habits." "I need to talk to the lady with extra eyes," I said, staring aghast at the rapidly deflating corpse. "I suppose you do," the man with the skull cup said softly. But he didn't offer any advice, just looked at his cup, gauging how much was left, and then walked away and left me to see myself home. I'm a campground manager. I went through my files of this year's event campers. There weren't any missing persons reports, which means that he was converted early into the event, and all those spiders were nesting inside him, waiting to hatch while he went about his day and spoke with his friends as if nothing were wrong. Perhaps he isn't the only one like this. He'll eventually be discovered as missing. If the investigating police department reaches out to us, the police will promise to search the campground and fail to discover anything. They certainly won't tell them about the freshly dug grave out here in the deep woods, in which we buried a trash bag filled with bones, skin, and liquid spiders. Like a smoothie from hell,